This video contains spoilers for the Owl House finale, as well as the show as a whole. There are also a little bit of spoilers for the Amphibia finale in this, so if you haven't seen those, then proceed with caution. Hey gang, it's Squill, and the Owl House has officially ended. Over a month ago. It finished over a month ago. Yeah, unlike my videos on the other Season 3 specials, it kinda took a while for me to get this one together. This is partially due to me being busy finishing up my current school semester, but also because it took me a while to really gather my thoughts on this finale. My opinion on it has gone up and down over the past month. I absolutely loved the finale while I was watching it, but the more I really thought about it and the more I rewatched it, the more criticisms popped up. And while I still enjoy watching the finale, it's still a fun episode, I can't help but feel like it's not as good as it could've or should've been. And since I see most people online praising the hell out of the finale, which is perfectly fine, I'm totally glad people enjoy it, I figured I might as well do something different and discuss my criticisms with the finale and what I think it could have done better. And before anyone says it, yes, I know most, if not all of my problems wouldn't exist if it weren't for the cancellation. I hate Disney for canceling the show, and am not envious at all of the writers for having to conceal everything into only 2.5 hours. But I'm also judging the final product as is, and even with the cancellation in mind, there's still things I wish the show did better. I'm just saying this now because I don't want like 50 comments telling me the show was canceled. I know you guys, I know. But before we start talking criticisms, I want to briefly go over the stuff I liked. As far as visuals go, this is easily the best looking episode of the entire show. There's so much detail put into the backgrounds here, it's insane. And the action and choreography in this is sublime. Luz's fake out death scene was definitely a very strong emotional moment. I mean, Amphibia did it better, and I'll get to why later, but you know, it's still good. I love Ida and King's reactions especially, it just feels so raw, the way they go all feral. I love seeing King's dad, the Titan, voiced by Aaron Hansen of all people. He surprisingly did an excellent job voicing him. He is definitely a fun character for the short time he appears. I liked his conversation with Luz. Luz's Titan design rips, it's so cool looking. Bellows' final moment was easily my favorite scene in the episode. His final, pathetic attempt to seem like the morally superior person. The way Luz just coldly stares at him as she boils him alive, not even validating his arguments with a response. It's just the perfect way for Bellows to go out. In general, I love how consistent the show has been at portraying Bellows as just so petty. He's not a deep character with a sympathetic backstory like Cain Andreas, nor is he a cold, badass, evil for the sake of being evil villain like the Lich. He's just some loser bigot who just so happens to be in a place of power. I still have some issues with the way Bellows was handled in Watching and Dreaming, and I'll get to those later, but his death scene was basically perfect. I like Luz's overall arc in this episode. Luz has been pretty down on herself throughout the majority of Season 3. So it's nice to see her bounce back from that and go back to how she was at the beginning of the show, but with an added sense of maturity. And lastly, the time skip was also very nice. I mean, Amphibia did it better because it gave us more time to explore how these characters are now, but you know, it's still good. Seeing these characters' future designs still gave me the feels, and the extended version of the credits theme was very nice. In fact, I think the word nice perfectly describes this finale. There's nothing controversial about it like the Starverses or Samurai Jack finales. It's just a nice little last hurrah for the show, and if that's all you were looking for, then this finale will satisfy you perfectly fine. But I still have my issues with this, and I will get into them right now. Problem number 1, the pacing. As far as I'm concerned, Thanks to Them is still the best episode of Season 3 and one of the best of the entire show. And one of the many reasons why is because of just how efficient it is. Like, you can obviously tell that the gang being stuck on Earth was meant to be a multi-episode arc like in Amphibia, but the episode still does a fantastic job at progressing the story and character arcs at a natural pace. Every scene in the episode feels important, and that's what you want for a shortened final season. And it's because of that that makes it kinda baffling just how much momentum was lost in the final 2 episodes. I talked about this a little bit in my For the Future video, but I feel like I kinda understated just how bad of a decision it was to include Basha and Kikimora in this episode. I get that they wanted to pay off these characters, and that would have been fine in a full-length Season 3, but this is the penultimate episode of the show. Are these really the characters we want to be spending so much time on? Why are we wasting so much time on Basha when we have the Collector and Bellows to deal with? And not only that, but watching and dreaming wastes a good chunk of time too. I mean, first off, that dream sequence, while kind of neat in a vacuum, had no right being 7 minutes long. I mean, first off, seeing Ida in King's dreams was completely unnecessary because they set up arcs that the characters never actually have. But in addition to that, did we really need Luz going around to each of her friends individually and having them berate her? We could have wasted less time by having them all berate her as a group. But along with that, the scenes with Camila and the kids were super unnecessary. I get that they wanted to give these characters something to do, and I'll have more on that later, but it adds very little to the actual episode. To the point where it almost would have been better if they were just puppets for the whole episode, and we didn't even spend any time on them. That's a lot of time that Season 3 wasted. However, it wouldn't really matter if the conclusions for the Collector and Bellows had enough time. Unfortunately, they did not. Let's start with the Collector. I'm sure most of us knew for a while now that the Collector would be redeemed in the finale of the show. After all, they were never really a villain, just a bratty kid with godlike powers. So even though I saw his redemption coming, I still wasn't a fan of how it was executed. First off, I don't think Luz should have been the one to redeem the Collector. And I get that Luz is good at befriending people, the show even points that out with Amity and Lilith. However, with Amity, it took them multiple episodes of interacting in order to be on good terms with each other. And with Lilith, it took her making a sacrifice and owning up to her mistakes in order to befriend Luz. That and the fact that she's Ida's sister means it was a little easier for her to be on Luz's side. But with the Collector, it really only takes a few minutes for them to be on Luz's side. Like, all it really took was Luz showing the Collector a few different places and suddenly they're okay now. And it's like, if that's all it took, then why couldn't King have done this at any other point? And that's the other thing, I feel like the Collector's redemption would have been much more believable to me if King was the one doing this instead of Luz. Since King already had a bond set up with the Collector, and even says that he relates to them. King even says at the end of For the Future that he plans to talk with the Collector, but that never actually happened. He just gets Luz to do it. And don't get me wrong, Luz still could have had a role in redeeming the Collector. Like, maybe she gives King advice for how to deal with him, or maybe they could have her talk to the Collector a little bit. But I still think King should have been at the forefront here. I have one more nitpick with the way the Collector was handled before we move on to Bellows, but I admit it's a little nitpicky. So, Luz's supposed death scene is supposed to be the Collector's turning point, right? It's the moment they realize that death is permanent and real people can't be fixed like toys. But I'm not sure if that completely works when Luz actually does come back. Like, I don't know, shouldn't the Collector be thinking, oh, okay, I guess mortality doesn't actually matter after all? I don't know, I guess I just feel like there was a lot of potential with this character, but not enough time to actually do anything with them. As for Bellows, I don't have as much to say about him as the Collector, but I was still disappointed with how he was handled as a whole. Like I said before, his actual death scene is fantastic, and easily the best scene in the entire episode. However, I can't help but feel like the actual fight between Luz and Bellows is kinda rushed. It sorta just comes and goes in the span of only a few minutes, and it feels like Bellows barely puts up an actual fight. It feels like he put more of an effort into fighting Luz in the Season 1 finale than he does here. In watching and dreaming, it just feels too easy. I wish Bellows put up more of an actual fight. The action itself is very cool and well animated, but it definitely should have lasted longer. The show did such a great job building up Belos as a villain, so it's very disappointing when there's very little struggle put into his final confrontation. Problem number 2, the lack of surprise. As far as my major criticisms go, this one is definitely the most subjective. Because I can definitely see the argument that the finale didn't need a ton of surprises, or that some people were surprised by something that the finale did, and both of those are perfectly fair. So I ask those of you to just hear me out on this one. One of my favorite aspects of The Owl House, especially in Season 2, is the way it's able to subvert its audience's expectations. One of my favorite examples is how the show handled V. They were built up as this dark version of Luz, when in reality they were a victim of Belos and turned out to be a perfectly fine person. Another great example is the reveal that Philip is Emperor Belos, a twist that I predicted, but was done in a subversive way, by revealing it to the audience before revealing it to the characters. This puts a much stronger emphasis on Luz's reaction to the reveal and how it impacts her as a character, rather than the twist itself. And as one final example, remember just how crazy it was in the Season 2 finale to see the Collector take over Belos as a villain? What a shocking way to end the season that was. So for a show that's able to so consistently keep its audience on their toes, I find it odd how the most shocking thing about the final episode is just how safe it was. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying a show being subversive is always a good thing. Like, obviously it makes sense that the Collector was redeemed, Belos was defeated, and that Luz is able to travel in between the human and demon realms. I really wouldn't want that happening any other way. But my issue with the finale is that there really isn't anything that surprised me. It all plays out about how you'd expect it to. I guess the closest thing would be Luz's fake-out death and her coming back with Titan powers. However, both of those were already done in the Amphibia finale, and in my opinion were much more impactful there. Not that I'm accusing the Owl House of ripping off Amphibia. I'm aware that the episode was probably already in production by the time the Amphibia finale aired. I'm just saying the fact that Amphibia did both of these concepts first, albeit in somewhat different ways, means that the Owl House's take on them, while still decent enough, pales in comparison to Amphibia's. The only other aspect that could have been surprising were the glyphs being gone. However, the impact of that is also lessened by the fact that they're brought back in the time skip. As I said before, the finale being predictable doesn't make it bad. It just makes it not as memorable or as interesting as it could have been. To me, at least. Problem number 3, the waste of characters. This is my biggest problem with the finale. Outside of Luz, I don't think any of the main characters were utilized well at all. Let's start with Eda and King. It was definitely cool to see Luz reunite with Eda and King after being separated from them for the rest of the season. And after not getting a ton of screen time in For the Future, and none at all in Thanks to Them, I was excited to see what the finale would do with them. But they're sorta just there for the rest of the episode. They don't really do much substantial. Which is strange because both of them could have easily had arcs. I already discussed the fact that King should have had a bigger role in redeeming the Collector, but you know what else they could have done with him? They could have actually let him meet his dad. It would have been great payoff to King's arc in Season 2, and would have introduced a level of bittersweetness to the finale, letting King talk to his dad right before he dies. And as for Eda, her dream at the beginning of the episode sets up the idea that she thinks she is a danger to the people around her. So she could have had an arc in which she holds back her powers out of fear of hurting Luz and King. Then, when Luz supposedly dies, she finally unleashes her powers by going feral mode. It's also a shame that Lilith didn't get anything to do here, especially after being featured in For the Future. And come on, no Hootie lines? None at all? He's literally the Owl House. You couldn't have at least given him a line in the time skip? Come on. But easily, the aspect of this finale that bothers me the most is how they handle Camila and the Head Squad. Not only do these scenes waste time and not add much to the episode, but it's such a lame way to send off 5 of the most important characters in the show. We're just watching them save a bunch of puppets, which feels very irrelevant to the rest of the episode. Like, if they broke, couldn't the Collector have just fixed them? It just kinda sucks how these are the final moments we get to see of these characters, instead of helping Luz fight Belos or something. I mean, let's think about Luz's death scene for a second. This scene already works as is, but imagine just how much more raw it would be if we got to see everyone's reaction to it instead of just Ida and King's. I mean, imagine seeing Camila react to her daughter dying, or Amity react to her girlfriend dying. This is why Amphibia's equivalent to this scene works so much more for me, because we get to see everyone's reaction. I mean, at the very least, we got to see the kids reunite with their parents, which was sweet. That's something I do wish we got to see with Sasha and Marcy and Amphibia. But even then, it's done over Luz monologuing, which is kinda lame. But back to my main point, it doesn't feel like any of these 5 characters had a satisfying conclusion. All aside from Willow, who had a pretty solid arc in For the Future. But what about Gus? He got almost nothing to do in Season 3 outside of supporting Willow and Hunter. Which sucks because Gus already feels very sidelined compared to other characters. They could have addressed the trauma he may have received from seeing into Belos' mind. And what about Camila? Sure, it was kinda neat to see her use glyphs in the archives, but imagine just how much more satisfying it would be if we got to see her use them against Belos. Seeing her use what Luz taught her in order to help defend her. Also, we were totally robbed of an interaction between her and Ida, just saying. I am beyond disappointed that we didn't get an actual interaction between Luz and Amity outside of the dream sequence at the beginning. Luz and Amity's relationship is literally the heart of the show. It's baffling to me that it's barely shown in the series finale. And it's not even like Amity had a ton to do in Season 3 before this point. I guess she had her subplot with Basha in For the Future, which I've already expressed I'm not a fan of. Aside from that, her biggest scene in Season 3 was probably the one between her and Luz at the end of Thanks to Them. Amity was sidelined hard in Season 3, and because of that, I wish we got one more big, dramatic, or romantic scene between her and Luz in the finale. But the character I was disappointed with the most was Hunter. Even more so than Luz, Hunter was the biggest victim of Belos' dictatorship. He has suffered verbal abuse and threats of physical violence. He's been manipulated by Belos for almost his entire life. He's forced to live with the knowledge that Belos has killed dozens of his previous clones and is after him next. He's had his best friend killed because of Belos, and has had his bodily autonomy taken over by Belos, leaving permanent scars all over him. And yet, not only does he play no part in defeating Belos, but he barely gets any lines in the entire episode. Heck, For the Future even sets up the fact that Hunter has powers now because of Flapjack, and yet the show does nothing with that. It just sucks, man. There was so much potential for one final confrontation between Hunter and Belos, and the show just wasted it. It's great that Luz had a solid final arc, but it sucks that it had to come at the cost of basically every other character. Despite all of my criticisms, I still love The Owl House as a show. In fact, it's one of my favorites. I'm just disappointed it had to end this way, that Disney just couldn't let it have a full-length final season. And hey, considering how bad of a deal the crew got, the finale definitely could have been worse. Let me know your thoughts on watching and dreaming in the comments, and have a good one. Squill out.